So, welcome back. We are at Wealth Psychology with Emily Bouchard from the Wealth Legacy Group, and this is coming to you from Sylvia Global Media. And I am here with my guest, Erik Newton, a family lawyer at Heath-Newton LLP, and we are here talking about prenups. Now, Erik, can we just dive into the nitty-gritty of what is involved in a prenup? Why are people having this conversation at all? What are the things that they need to be looking at, and make sure that what they don't even know that they don't know when it comes to a prenup?
Sure. I should first tell you that prenups and marriage law is different from state to state, so I can only speak specifically to California, but I'm happy to do that to give you an overview of how it works. The first premise that everybody needs to consider is the simple fact that no matter where you live, no matter what jurisdiction you're in, you have a prenup already. And that's because the laws of your particular jurisdiction address marriage, and that means what happens to money during marriage and what happens to assets after marriage and before marriage. And that's a prenup. That's all it is. A prenup is just a bundle of rights that sets forth what you believe should happen to assets and control of those assets before, during, and after marriage.
Okay, so you said that really specifically, and a lot of people who tuned in would understand that. I find that one of my roles in this is just to tease it out a little bit, as if my 13-year-old granddaughter were listening in. So I'm going to just say it. So basically you're saying that there are laws in anybody's state that is tuning in right now, or maybe even country. That say before you get married, this is what you own. And after you're married, this is what you own. And then if you were to divorce and separate, this is what you would own.
And here's what would happen. Yeah.
And here's what would happen with belongings that you have that you own together or separately.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And that's a prenup. And so the fact is that married couples have prenups. They have the default prenup that's created by their state or their country or their jurisdiction. And so from my perspective, the question isn't, do you want a prenup? The question is, does the prenup that you already have that's been set by the state work for you? And the answer for 90% of couples is yes. That prenup is perfect. It's been created over hundreds, thousands of years in some places of common law in the UK and common sense, as I said in the New York Times article. And so it works for most people, but for some people it just doesn't. And regardless of whether it works or not, people need to know what it is, because it's a contract, and it's a contract you're signing by dint of becoming married. And many people don't know what that contract says.
And I love that you talk about it as a contract, because I think people miss the fact that when they get married and they're signing their marriage license, they're getting all these things together, they're signing, like, it's a contract. You are entering into a contract.
Yeah, it's right in the vows, a marital contract. Yeah, absolutely. It's and yeah, I'm glad you point that out. It's a point that people are unaware of, and in my view, couples should come and talk to a professional, an attorney in their area, just to find out what it is that they're doing. It's the most important contract that most people will sign in their entire lives. And in my view, the marital relationship sets the foundation for everything else that we do. For healthy couples, it's the reason people go to work. It's the reason people have the drama that they have in the rest of their lives. And it should be solid. It should be a solid platform, so that you know what the contract is. So that's the foundational point. You've got one whether you want one or not. Now in California, just very briefly, what that contract says in California is that assets that you acquire prior to marriage remain your separate property. And if there's ever a divorce, you get to keep your separate property, and it stays separate. It's not divided. Assets that you acquire during marriage and the income that you earn during marriage is considered to be community property. Community property is owned equally by both partners in the marriage. And if there's ever a divorce, that's what gets divided evenly. And of course, assets acquired after marriage are separate property.
Now, is it just assets, or what about liabilities? What if you come to a marriage with a lot of debt?
Oh, great question. Well, the same theory holds. So debt that you acquired prior to marriage, in theory, remains separate. Any debt that's acquired during marriage, and this, by the way, is a clincher for so many people, or it's a surprise, I should say, for so many people. Debt that you acquire during marriage is considered community property, even if you acquire it in your own name. For instance, on a credit card that your spouse doesn't even know exists, that's still community debt. We had a case recently where somebody had acquired an immense amount of gambling debt in Las Vegas, and it was community property. So,
and the other person in the relationship didn't know that until it was time for the divorce, and disclosure had to happen in terms of what they owned and what they had as debt.
right, and technically they need to share in that. There are some technical procedures that we can use to get around it sometimes, but for the most part, debt acquired during marriage is community property and shared evenly by both people.
Okay, so we have to do a little side caveat, because
Yeah.
is there something somebody can do legally in a relationship if they have a concern that there might be a gambling issue, or there might be something that they can check and know what kinds of debts are out there that are in their spouse's name?
Well, they can check public records, but the challenge is that many of these debts are held by private companies that aren't reporting them yet to credit reporting agencies. So it can be a real challenge to find debts that are held in your spouse's name. And again, this is a reason that you've got to talk about these issues in advance and have an immense amount of trust built up.
So if I went to a lawyer before I got married to have a prenup done and have it be my one that I'm dictating in the marriage as opposed to my state's, is that something that I could have put in it? Like, Eric, I know that he loves to go play poker with his buddies, and he enjoys going to Las Vegas, and I love him dearly, and I've just heard about this, and is it all right to put this in the prenup that any debts that are acquired that I wasn't aware of, I'm not responsible for, like they're not mine at the time of the relationship ending? Can I put that in?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that's a fairly common clause. That's something that we see all the time. And it's not usually around the issue of gambling. It's usually around the issue of real estate investment, for instance. Or a very common pairing in relationships, I find, is the entrepreneur on one hand with the stable, kind of career-oriented spouse on the other hand. They come together because they're an electric match in many ways. And they're a good balance if you think about it from a portfolio perspective. And from a very dry perspective, it's a good portfolio to have a risk taker and a stable person. But it also creates a lot of conflict. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the stable party wants to have some sort of safety structures built around the risks that the other one is taking. And so that's a fairly common clause that we'll create.
Yeah, and I can just see how vitally important it is in terms of how you have that conversation, right? It's like, There's one way to have it, which is, I'm terrified and I want to be secure. And another is, because then the other person's going to feel like, how can you not trust me? And why are you afraid? But if you have it from the standpoint of, my risk tolerance is so much lower than yours. I need a baseline of security. And this is really about some core fears I have around security that are mine, and it's more about so I can really love and embrace your risk-taking more fully in the relationship and not be afraid. And you don't have to deal with my insecurities and fear around my need for security, and then you can really have that freedom that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely right. What you're speaking to is so vital. That money drives up our deepest issues. I think the two realities in the human experience, from my perspective, that drive up our unresolved issues are finances and romance. And when you bring them together into one context, all of our unresolved stuff is going to come up to the front.
Yeah, and how many people actually have any kind of background of role modeling that's really excellent and clear in terms of how to have these conversations effectively and, have them be really solid and strengthen your relationship. So we're going to have another segment in just a moment with Erik Newton of Heath-Newton LLP, based out of San Francisco. My name is Emily Bouchard. I'm your host at Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media, and we are talking about prenups from all kinds of different angles in terms of how they emotionally impact relationships. So thanks for tuning in.